Imagine sneaking through the shadows of ancient Sparta, your heart racing as you eye a forbidden pile of cheese, knowing one wrong move could cost you your life. In the heart of ancient Sparta, where the sun scorched the rocky hills and the wind carried the scent of olive groves, a boy named Krios knelt in the dust, his bare feet tough as leather. At 9 years old, he was small but wiry, his dark eyes sharp with a fire kindled by 2 years in the Agog, Sparta's relentless training system. The Agog had ripped him from his mother's embrace at 7, thrusting him into a world where weakness was a sin and survival a skill. The barracks where he lived with 20 other boys were stark, their reed mats thin against the cold stone floor, offering no comfort. Food came in sparse handfuls: gruel, stale bread, sometimes a scrap of dried fish, never enough to fill the gnawing void in their stomachs. The elders planned it that way, teaching hunger as a teacher, sharpening their instincts until they were as keen as a wolf's. Krios learned to move with purpose, his body lean from endless days of running across jagged terrain, his soles hardened by marching barefoot over thorns and stones. The Agog wasn't just about fighting, it was about crafting boys into something more. Warriors who could face death with a steady gaze. Every morning, the Irons, older teens who ruled the barracks with iron will, drove them through drills, wrestling in the dust until their muscles screamed, sparring with blunt spears until their arms trembled, swimming in icy rivers until their breath caught in their chests. Krios remembered his first day, shivering in the dawn light as an Iron barked orders, his voice like a whip crack. "Sparta needs wolves, not lambs," the Iron had shouted, and Krios had felt those words carve themselves into his soul. Stealing was part of the game, a test of cunning the Agogi demanded. Krios had watched boys slip into farmers' fields under moonlight, returning with figs or bread, their faces alight with pride. But failure meant consequences, not for the act, but for the clumsiness. Krios's friend Theron, a lanky boy with quick hands and a quicker grin, had once fumbled a stolen apple in front of an Iron. The older boy's eyes had gleamed as he dragged Theron to the center of the barracks. The lesson clear: be swift or be sorry. Krios had stood frozen, watching Theron take the punishment in silence, his friend's face a mask of resolve. From that day, Krios vowed to be invisible, practicing stealth in the dead of night, gliding past sleeping boys, his heart pounding as he imagined greater prizes. The Agogi wasn't all hardship. There were moments of strange beauty. At dusk, the boys would gather to sing hymns to Apollo, their voices rising in harmony, their bodies swaying in rhythmic dances that mimicked battle formations. These rituals bound them, forging bonds stronger than blood. Krios and Theron had become like brothers, sharing whispered plans under the stars, dreaming of the day they'd stand as Spartan warriors. One night, as they lay on their mats, Theron spoke of a ritual at the temple of Artemis Orthia, a test that separated the bold from the broken. "They leave cheeses on her altar," Theron whispered, his eyes gleaming. "Steal one, and you're marked for greatness. Fail, and you'll wish you hadn't." Krios felt a thrill ripple through him, a mix of fear and hunger, not just for food, but for glory. The Agog had stripped away his childhood, but it had given him something else, a hunger to prove himself, no matter the cost. The night was a cloak of shadows as Krios crept toward the temple of Artemis Orthia, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the faint, sweet burn of incense drifting from the sacred grounds. The temple stood like a sentinel, its stone columns pale under a swollen moon, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of devotion. At its heart lay the altar, a low slab draped in white cloth, piled high with rounds of cheese, offerings to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, whose favor demanded courage and cunning. Krios's stomach growled, a reminder of the Agogi's starvation tactics. But it was more than hunger driving him. The ritual was a test, whispered about in the barracks with equal parts awe and dread. Steal a cheese, and you'd earn a place among the elite. Stumble, and the Guardians, older youths with keen eyes and swift hands, would make you pay. Krios crouched behind a gnarled olive tree, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the grounds. Other boys moved in the darkness, their forms flickering like ghosts. Theron among them, his lanky frame unmistakable. Krios could see the tension in his friend's shoulders, the same resolve that had carried them through countless drills. The Guardians patrolled the temple's edges, their cloaks blending with the night, their hands gripping coiled leather straps. Krios had seen those straps in action, their sharp cracks echoing in the barracks when a boy failed a task. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the altar. The cheeses glowed faintly, their creamy surfaces a taunt to his empty belly. He waited, patient as a hunter, until a cloud veiled the moon, plunging the grounds into deeper shadow. He moved then, low and silent, his body hugging the earth like a serpent. His bare feet found soft dirt, avoiding twigs and stones. Ahead, a boy named Leandros, stocky and brash, made his attempt. Krios heard a rustle, then a sharp gasp as Leandros tripped, alerting a guardian. The older youth was on him in an instant, a shadow striking with precision. Leandros scrambled back, empty-handed, his arm marked by a red welt. Krios's pulse quickened, but he pressed forward, slipping between two columns, their cool stone grazing his shoulder. The altar was close now, the cheeses within reach. He could almost taste their richness, feel their weight in his hands. A prize that meant more than food. It meant survival, respect, a step toward manhood. As his fingers brushed the edge of a cheese, a twig snapped underfoot, the sound slicing through the silence. Krios froze, his heart lurching. A guardian's head turned, eyes glinting like a wolf's in the dark. The older boy stepped closer, his strap dangling, his shadow stretching across the ground. Krios's mind raced. Run, and he'd be hunted. Stay, and he'd face the consequences. The Agog had taught him to think like a warrior, so he melted into the column's shadow, his breath so faint it barely stirred the air. The guardian hesitated, then turned as another boy's clumsy footsteps echoed nearby. Krios seized the moment, snatching a small cheese and tucking it under his cloak. His heart soared, but the danger wasn't over. He had to escape the grounds, past the guardians, back to the barracks. As he slipped into the shadows, he heard Theron's sharp grunt, a sound that told him his friend had been spotted. Krios sprinted through the underbrush, the stolen cheese pressed tight against his chest, its cool surface grounding him as thorns snagged his legs. The temple of Artemis Orthia faded behind him, its columns swallowed by the night, but the danger was far from gone. His lungs burned, his bare feet pounding the earth, every rustle in the dark a potential threat. The guardians were relentless, their leather straps ready to teach lessons in pain. Krios's mind was sharp, honed by the Agog's endless trials, but his heart faltered when he heard Theron's cry, a raw, desperate sound that cut through the night like a blade. His friend was in trouble, and Krios couldn't ignore it. He skidded to a halt, crouching low in a tangle of bushes, and peered back toward the temple. Theron was pinned to the ground, two guardians looming over him, their straps raised. A cheese lay in the dirt, just out of reach, a mocking reminder of his failure. Theron's face was set, his jaw clenched, refusing to give the guardians the satisfaction of another sound. Krios's fingers tightened around his own cheese, his triumph soured by guilt. Theron had been bold, but boldness wasn't enough in Sparta. The priests, standing on the temple steps with torches casting eerie light, watched impassively, their chants a low hum, honoring Artemis. This ritual was her domain, a test of not just skill, but endurance, a way to forge boys into men who could bleed and still stand. Krios's instincts screamed to run, to save his prize and himself, but Theron was his brother in all but blood. They'd shared hunger, laughed through pain, and dreamed of standing as warriors together. He scanned the ground, spotting a fallen branch half buried in the dirt. A plan sparked, crude, but it might work. He hurled the branch into the bushes, its crash loud enough to draw one guardian's attention. The older boy turned, stepping away, and Krios darted forward, grabbing Theron's arm. "Up now!" he hissed, pulling his friend to his feet. Theron stumbled, his back slick with sweat and blood, but he moved, driven by the same fire that had kept him silent under the strap. They dove into a thicket, thorns tearing at their skin as they crawled deeper, the cheese still clutched in Krios's hands. The second guardian gave chase, his footsteps heavy, his strap whistling through the air, narrowly missing Krios's legs. The boys pressed themselves into the earth, hearts pounding, as the guardian's shadow passed overhead. The chants of the priests grew faint, their torches a distant glow. Krios and Theron lay still, their breaths ragged, the night their only shield. Theron's eyes met Krios's, a flicker of gratitude beneath the pain. They'd escaped, for now, but the ritual's weight hung over them, a reminder that in Sparta, every victory came with a cost. The barracks were still a mile away, and the dawn would bring new trials. The thicket was a haven of shadows as Krios and Theron caught their breath, the cheese between them like a hard-won relic. The night air was cold, biting at their sweat-soaked skin, and Theron's face was pale, his back a map of welts hidden beneath his cloak. Krios wanted to speak, to ease the weight of what they'd endured, but words felt hollow. The Agorge had taught them to bury pain, to let it fuel their resolve. But seeing Theron's silence cut deeper than any thorn, the cheese, smudged with dirt and blood, was a symbol of triumph for Krios, but for Theron it was a reminder of failure. They waited until the temple's chants faded completely before moving, the silence a fragile promise of safety. Krios led the way, guiding Theron through the underbrush, their steps careful to avoid detection. The barracks lay a mile off, a squat stone building nestled in a valley where torchlight flickered like distant stars. Theron stumbled, his strength waning, and Krios steadied him, his arm firm but gentle. The cheese felt heavier now, its weight a burden of pride and guilt. Krios had escaped the Guardians, but Theron had paid the price, and the thought gnawed at him like a hungry beast. In Sparta, success was shared, but so was shame, and Krios felt both in his bones. They moved in silence, the night their ally, the stars above indifferent to their struggle. As they neared the barracks, the glow of torches marked the entrance, where the Irons stood watch, their eyes sharp as spears. Krios tightened his cloak around the cheese, his heart steady but his nerves taut. Theron straightened, hiding his pain behind a mask of defiance, his steps firmer despite the cost. They slipped into the crowd of returning boys, some grinning with their own prizes, others silent, their hands empty. Damos, the head Iron, stood tall, his presence commanding the night. "Show your prizes," he barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Krios stepped forward, lifting the cheese, its surface marred but whole. Damos's nod was brief, a flicker of approval, but his gaze lingered on Theron, whose empty hands drew a cold stare. "You failed," Deimos said, his tone flat, and Krios saw the shame flicker in Theron's eyes, a wound deeper than any mark on his back. The boys filed into the barracks, their whispers sharp and fleeting. Failure in the Agorge was a stain, a shadow that could follow you into manhood, whispered in the ranks when you stood to fight. Krios wanted to defend Theron, to shout that his friend had been brave, had faced the Guardians with courage, but Sparta cared only for results. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and dust, the torchlight casting long shadows across the stone walls. Krios slipped the cheese into Theron's hands, a silent vow to share the victory. Theron's fingers closed around it, but his eyes stayed distant, fixed on something beyond the barracks walls. The ritual was over, but its echoes lingered, and Krios knew the true test of their bond was yet to come. Dawn broke over the barracks, the sky a pale gold as Krios and Theron sat among the other boys, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. The cheese, now broken into small pieces, was shared quietly, its sharp taste a fleeting comfort on their tongues. The barracks were alive with low murmurs, some boys boasting of their stealth, others nursing their wounds in silence. Theron's face was drawn, his back hidden beneath his cloak, but his pain clear in the tightness of his jaw. Krios watched him, the weight of the night pressing on them both. The ritual at Artemis Orthia's temple had been more than a test of skill. It was a forge, shaping them through hunger, fear, and sacrifice. The goddess's altar still loomed in their minds, its cheeses a symbol of what they'd risked and what they'd gained. Damos's shout shattered the morning calm, calling the boys to assemble outside. Krios stood shoulder to shoulder with Theron, their breath visible in the chilly air. The valley around them quiet, except for the rustle of olive trees. The elders arrived, their cloaks heavy with authority, their faces carved from years of war and judgment. Each boy was called to present their prize, a moment to prove their worth. Krios stepped forward, his cheese held high, its dirt-streaked surface a badge of his cunning. The elder's nod was swift, a silent mark of approval, and Krios felt a surge of pride. But when Theron's turn came, his empty hands drew whispers from the crowd, a ripple of judgment that stung worse than any strap. Damos stepped forward, his eyes cold, and Theron stood tall, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The iron strap hung at his side, a silent threat, and Krios's heart clenched. Theron didn't flinch, his silence a defiance that spoke louder than words. The elders watched, their faces unreadable, as Damos raised his hand, the strap's shadow falling across Theron's back. The moment was brief but heavy, each motion a lesson in endurance. Theron staggered but held his ground, his eyes burning with a fire that refused to break. Krios rushed to his side when it was over, steadying his friend, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. The other boys watched in silence, their faces a mix of respect and caution, knowing Theron's stand had marked him as something more. That night, as the boys lay on their reed mats, the barracks quiet except for the crackle of dying torches, Theron whispered to Krios, "Next time I'll be faster, I'll be stronger." His voice was hoarse but resolute, a vow carved from the night's trials. Krios nodded, the taste of the cheese still lingering, a reminder of what they'd endured together. Years later, Krios and Theron would stand as men, their bodies scarred but unyielding, their names spoken with pride among Sparta's ranks. The ritual of Artemis Orthia had tested them, marked them, not just with pain, but with a fire that no strap could extinguish. They had stolen, they had bled, they had survived, and in doing so, they had become what Sparta demanded, warriors forged in the crucible of sacrifice, ready to face any battle that awaited.